Well, it's time to bring you a sound review of the biggest newsmakers this week, crammed into an informative hour. Good morning, this is Media Monitor. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. Here's what's coming up for you this morning. We start by looking at the heavy rainstorms that have struck Gauteng. President Jacob Zuma has survived another motion of no confidence. We'll also look at the Madonsela tape leak saga. The presidency has now lodged a complaint with the new public protector over the leak recordings. We'll also delve into the Concord ruling in the SARS K-word case and the unanimous judgment written by Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng. The Department of Labour announced wage increments for domestic workers. Now, is that wage increment adequate? Find out later. And lastly, we look at the new President-elect Donald Trump's victory, which has been marred by protests. But first, as always, it's 900 hours. These are the top leading news. Scores of Mpumalanga residents have been left destitute after a storm hit the area, compelling the municipality to step in. More rains are expected in the coming days in the province. Meanwhile, the bodies of a Gauteng toddler and a woman swept away by Wednesday's flash floods are yet to be recovered. Search efforts along the Yaqske River resumed for a third day yesterday. And ANC Treasurer General Dr. Zweli Mkhize has called on party members to unite to reclaim the support of the ANC. Speaking in Umzinyathi, north of Durban, Mkhize did not rule out by-elections as a means of rectifying mistakes made during the nomination process for the recent local government elections. His visit followed the party's decision to send its national leadership across the country to resolve divisions. Let me welcome my guest this morning, media analyst Mr. Melo Magolego, as well as social and political commentator Mr. Levi Kwabato on the main desk. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Alicia.
Morning, Alicia.
Morning. Now, a quick look at the big hashtags of the week. And for this segment, you do remember him. He is SABC digital news producer, Mr. Neo Mogoeng, the man responsible for everything you find on the digital front of things. So, Neo, good morning to you.
Alicia.
Welcome back. What was happening this week? I'm sure it was quite a busy week. Let's leave the US alone. But what were the big news here in South Africa?
News, of course, Brian Molefe was big in South Africa. I mean, everyone was talking about him.
Yeah.
Ngabo being released from jail. It was also a big story. But looking at Brian Molefe, I mean, if you look at what's happening on social media, on Friday when the story came out, about 1 million accounts were reached on Twitter. And remember that South Africa has 7 million people on Twitter. So it also had 1.2 million impressions on social media. It's a lot. It's big numbers that people are talking about.
What were they tweeting though? What were people saying? Are they happy he resigned? Are they confused as to why he resigned? Do they think he has something to do with what the public protector's report is saying? What's going on?
There are mixed reactions on Twitter. Let's just read one tweet. Mr. Molefe says stepping down was not an act of admission to wrongdoing on his part. And there are other analysts who are coming out and saying he has done a great job at Eskom, but this are social media reaction. Mr. Molefe says he will take the time off to reflect before deciding on his next career move. So we'll see what happens in his career moving forward.
I want to find out from our gentleman there. Gentlemen, what did you make of these latest developments this week?
I think for me, I mean, it is obviously a sad case because you have one very capable black executive now stepping down amidst scandal. I mean, obviously, I think if you read the Public Protector's State of Capture report, I mean, it was damning in terms of Brian and so on. So I felt that perhaps he felt that from a corporate governance perspective and public relations from an Eskom perspective, it was better if he let go.
Levi?
Agreed here. I think, it's the right move for Brian to make, however sad it is. But I think it will give him the opportunity to wrap up things at Eskom, and also I think prepare for, defending himself and, proving us wrong, as he said he would do.
You know, we're going to talk about this later on in the show. It's unfortunate, no, that you're not going to be here. But I just want to find out. You better watch the rest of the show. It's fine. You're going to sit downstairs and put this on digital media. Let's talk about another big hashtag of this week. What was the big one?
It was Ngabo Dlamini being released from prison by bail. If you look at our graphic down here, the topic on Tuesday, of course, was big, but it has so far gone down.
Yeah.
But out of the tweets that have been analyzed by this program, out of the 1,300 tweets, we have about 6.1 impressions. People saw this tweet or on their timeline. So it is a big topic. It's one topic that we've been following for weeks now.
What are they saying? What are they writing this time?
When you look at on Twitter, they're comparing him to the late President Nelson Mandela.
Isn't that a beautiful picture?
It is a beautiful picture, but because when he came out, his son was brought to Wits.
Oh, man.
When you read this tweet, it says, when you've proven to be the best, you will be compared with the best. I mean, talking about Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
And the following tweet, of course, it says, do not be distracted. They once called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, which with this iconic picture taken by Reuters. And then another picture that was making rounds on social media, of course, was why was Ngabo Dlamini shackled. People did not understand why he has to be treated like a terrorist.
Quick reactions from you, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Liva.
I think, this story, it's a proclaimed supporter of the ANC, so he's a child of the ANC, who is now pushing the narrative that he has been put in jail by the ANC. So as a governing party, I think the ANC looking at this should be a bit concerned with this narrative coming out. And also a lot of people just thinking how unfair it is. I'm not too sure about the comparison though to Nelson Mandela, but I think certainly there is a lot to look at with regards to the ANC.
Hey, it's 27 years and 27 days. Melo, what did you think?
I think it was very interesting. I've been watching the actual bail hearing where, like, for him representing was Tembeka Nugaitobi and then Talimpo and the state prosecutor advocate Ruben there. And I think one of the things that came out there is that his defense team argued that it's unconstitutional what they're doing because it almost harks back to what they were doing in apartheid with detention without trial. So I think the judge then listened to those arguments and he was convinced from that perspective that in our new democratic dispensation we can't really just be denying people bail without justified means. So it was, I think, a big tick for our judiciary. Again, it shows that it actually does work. But for me, the one thing that I'd hope is that it works as well for the people at the bottom as it does for these high-profile cases. I'm actually enjoying these
cases being done live on television, and we cover them here on 404. No, give us our final big hashtag of this week. What was it?
Is Donald Trump, of course.
Of course.
Most of us were surprised. We were at an investigative journalism program when the news broke out, and everyone just was shocked. Today, just in a minute, it reached 1 million accounts with 1.9 impressions on social media. So it's just 1 minute and people are really talking about this.
What were the tweets? I'm really eager to hear what they were saying. I mean, there's even protests that are currently taking place.
I know this morning 2 people were arrested. There are no similarities between the Americans who voted for Donald Trump and the English who voted for Brexit. People are comparing the two. People are saying this has been coming a long time. So, yeah. A lot of discontent.
What did you think, Melo? A quick one.
I think, to be honest, I had hoped that Hillary would win, as much as she also has her own problems.
Everybody hoped.
Yeah, the deep thing that's problematic with Trump is that he ran sort of on a racist platform. And the fact that he ran on a racist platform, even if he didn't mean it, the fact that he did it, I don't think that such a person should be elected as a president of a country.
Well, we have a Trump president.
Yeah, I think this is good in the sense that it puts the spotlight on democracy and democratic culture. What is it really? And I saw some tweets as well saying, America is finally joining the rest of the world. So I think in as far as that is concerned, it puts us, in a space where we can deliberate on these things and question what democracy really is.
Very interesting. Give them the URL where they can get all this content that is on our digital front.
So you could just go to www.sabc.co.za/news. That's where you'll get everything from today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us the big hashtags. Now go start working because Media Monitor is about to end in an hour's time and you have to upload that episode. Well, stay tuned as we unpack the harsh rainstorms that have wreaked havoc here in Gauteng shortly after this break. This is Media Monitor.
Macro is going big on festive season savings by bringing you cooking deals like a Brabrantia 7-piece stainless steel cookware set, only 1199, save 300 Rand. We're mixing things up with a Russell Hobbs jug blender for only 599, save 300 Rand. And save 500 Rand on the Russell Hobbs Legacy Breakfast Pack, now only 999. Share in these and other big festive savings for home, for business, for life, only at Macro, big on life.
Welcome back. Well, severe thunderstorms have hit Gauteng, wreaking havoc across the city. The heavy rains, hailstorms, as well as flash flooding destroyed houses and damaged cars. At least 5 people are reported to have lost their lives, while a search is still continuing for a 3-year-old toddler who is believed to have drowned in the flooded Yaqui River near Alexandra. Now, the disaster management services have evacuated affected families around Johannesburg and Eguruleni to safer areas. The South African Weather Services have warned Gauteng residents of the extreme weather conditions over the weekend. Let's take a look at this insert.
A frantic and desperate search continues. A woman and her 23-year-old son swept downriver.
Apparently there was sun with her, but he came out of the vehicle and he could not save her.
This stage we found there's nobody in the vehicle, so the search will continue river-wise.
In Pretoria's eastern suburbs, there was a power outage caused by the floods. While in Mamelodi some houses were damaged. The city's disaster management says it's prepared for the weekend's anticipated heavy rains. Residents have been urged to be on guard this weekend. In Johannesburg, the search for Everett Chauke will resume on Saturday. Rescuers searched a 30-kilometer stretch of the Juske River. The toddler was swept away after a tree she and her father sought refuge on gave way.
We are going to continue at least a few more days. Let's give it a few more days as well and see what happens.
The Stretla residents are salvaging what they can. Most lost everything when the Juske River overflowed. In spite of the weekend's predicted rains, residents insist they will stay. Cleaning up continues across the city. Mahlako Komane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, for this segment, I'm very pleased to be joined by our very own SABC meteorologist, Mr. Philip Hawkins. We call him the weather doctor. Good morning, Phil.
Yeah, very good morning.
A very good morning indeed. But, geez, what is currently going on? A lot of people cannot differentiate between El Nino and La Nina that we're currently having now. What is the difference?
They're actually opposites. So El Nino we all know so well by now because, you know, the droughts and all of that. Yeah, everybody's very, very sure of what happened there. La Nina should be the opposite. So what we should see in a La Nina event would be a lot more rainfall, not necessarily strong rainfall events, just generally on average a lot more rainfall. But unfortunately at the moment, that's not really what's happening. We're seeing a very, very weak La Nina system. And so on average, we're not getting much stronger rainfall. We're just getting those rainfall events, which are much more severe than we used to.
But what does this mean, Philip? Does this have anything to do with climate change?
It does have something to do with climate change. On average, we are seeing a lot more rainfall events that are very, very heavy. In fact, we're seeing a lot more weather events that are very extreme. So we're going from droughts to heavy rainfalls. Yeah. We're getting strong winds. We're getting high seas. A lot more events that we never really used to see, or that we didn't see very often at all. And now they're beginning to become more and more common. And that is an effect of climate change. And it shouldn't be seen as something that humans have done on their own. It is a cyclical event. We have, though, definitely contributed to what's going on.
Look, now, we've seen Gauteng under, serious pounding. Just a couple of months ago, it was Durban. And also, we've seen some rains also in the Eastern Cape that have wreaked havoc in the area. Why is it going around in certain segments? I mean, look at that. Flash flooding in Johannesburg, Philip.
Yeah, look, the Highveld has always been a place of line thunderstorms, which are one of the most severe storm types that we get. This was, in fact, a line thunderstorm events which happened, which caused all of this flooding. And the eastern parts of the country at the moment are where the low pressure systems are, and so that's why the eastern parts of the country, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN and Gauteng, of course, this is where we're getting these heavy rainfall events, and this is why we're getting the severe weather there as opposed to the west.
Geez, Philip, I'm sure everybody at home wants to know, how long is this then supposed to last?
It's supposed to last through the summer, all the way through the summer season. It's not necessarily saying that we're going to get a lot of these heavy storm events, not saying that this is going to continue happening over and over again through the summer. The summer season is obviously our wetter season, and this is when we generally get our more severe weather in terms of precipitation. So heavy thunderstorms, lots of lightning, hail, things like that. So we are seeing a lot of rainfall at the moment. It's not necessarily going to continue throughout the entire season, but we're definitely going to see a lot more storm events starting to come in.
But Philip, why then are they saying that the recent rains and the flash floods, they're not affecting the water levels, that the water levels are still so slow?
Yeah, look, this is the thing, is that the water does take a long time to drain all the way through these catchment areas, all the way through the rivers and get to the dams. It will be doing something for them. It's not as if it has zero effect. But the problem with these kind of events is that we see a lot of rain falling in a very short period of time, followed by hot conditions again. So your evaporation plays a massive role in that. We're seeing a lot of evaporation straight after these storm events. We're seeing a lot of it sinking into the groundwater, because coming from a drought, there's very low levels of groundwater. Ground's trying to take in as much as it can, and so not as much as we would usually see in a long-term storm event is actually getting into the rivers and getting into the dams.
So should the farmers be smiling for a bumper season at the end of this year and early next year?
Look, it's hopeful. We're hoping that this is going to happen, but really the farmers should be cautious, because as I said, we're seeing these storm events which are bringing hail and things like that, and that of course is so destructive to the crops.
Absolutely. And speaking of being cautious, I mean, what are some of the precautions that people can adhere to when it comes to things like flash floods? What can you do if you find yourself in a situation like that? Because I mean, I saw somebody literally watching their car being watered, being thrown down the streets in water.
Yeah, well, this is the problem, is that a lot of people were stuck in the roads at that time. There was heavy congestion. Of course, as soon as it starts raining hard like that, you get car accidents, people get stuck, and there really wasn't a lot of places for anybody to go. So unfortunately, a lot of these people got caught in it, and there really was not much they could do. And in that sort of circumstance, just leave your car. It's not worth your life. Open your windows, get out of your car if the water starts rising above the level of the doors. Get out of your car and get away from that area that's flooding as quickly as you can before it gets to the point where you can't get away from it. Because as we saw, we were seeing footage of people sitting on cars in very fast flowing water, and there's no way that you can swim through that. And even if you did jump in, exactly, and even if you did jump in, you would be getting washed into cars and hurt yourself there. You would be getting things washed into you which hurt you. So just as soon as it starts flooding and you can't get away, you can't drive away, get out of your car and get away from that flooding area.
You know, Philip, everybody watches news bulletins, but when you guys come on, I can assure you very few people actually pay attention to the weather update. Please tell them the importance and also give us a quick roundup of what we can expect in weather this week.
Yeah, well, in terms of our weather this week, we are expecting quite a wet one already starting off, especially in the northeastern parts of our country. This is though because we're seeing low pressure systems linking up from South Africa's eastern coastline and from the northwestern parts of southern Africa. So a lot of southern Africa getting some light rainfall this week. We're expecting that rainfall to continue, of course, throughout the eastern parts of the country this week. And we're also hoping for some rainfall in the central interior, because the agricultural areas in the central interior around the Free State really do need some of that rainfall. We're not at the moment forecasting severe thunderstorms coming in to the central interior yet. Today we do have a weather watch issued by the Weather Service for severe thunderstorms over the interior of Limpopo, so that's definitely something to watch out for there.
All right, where can they get further details on the weather updates, Phil?
Well, further details from the SABC, there's always our website, the SABC website. You can just go on there and follow the links to the weather. Alternatively, this is where you can email us, is weather@sabc.co.za. Call us 011-714-5077. And if unsuccessful with all of that, there's a lot of weather information available from the South African Weather Service as well, and that of course is just www.saws.co.za.
The weather doctor, Mr. Philip Hawkins, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to drive straight home after this show because I don't want to be stuck in a storm anyway riding home. We're going to take a quick ad break. And after that, was the motion of no confidence about President Zuma or about control of the country's political destiny? Will the former public protector be charged for the contravention of the Public Protectors Act? More after this short break.
Macro is lending a helping hand with big festive season savings that'll move you. Like the Totem 16-inch or 20-inch Mojo bikes for only $10.99. Save 200 Rand. Or save 200 Rand on the Bounce King 10-foot trampoline, now only $24.99. And zip away on a Zingo X100 electric scooter for $1,999. Save 300 Rand. Share in these and other big festive savings for home, for business, for life. Only at Macro. Big on life.
NC MPs came out strongly in defense of President Jacob Zuma, squashing the motion of no confidence brought about by the Democratic Alliance in the National Assembly earlier this week. The party argued that the motion was influenced by the DA's ambitions to take over power and to control the country's economy. However, opposition parties fired back, accusing the ANC MPs of compromising their integrity just for the sake of one man. The DA was defeated with 214 votes by the ruling party's MPs as they only managed 126. But here's more on this clip.
We cannot accept those results. What is on paper? We want to know.
Honorable members, the voting summary is as follows. The yes is 126, the no's is 214, abstain is 1, not voted 58. Honorable members, the motion is therefore not agreed to.
Really, gentlemen, this is the third motion of no confidence. What are we still doing here? Melo, let's start with you.
I think for me, one of the things that keeps coming up when Musi Maimane, DA leader, talks about this thing is he talks about a language of impeachment, and then there's also a language of no confidence, motions of no confidence. I think often there's a confusion about that because what you find in countries where they elect a president directly, I mean, obviously the president wasn't elected by parliament, so they can't now go and pull that president out from his position. So then they'd go through a process called impeachment. But in our system, since we don't directly vote for a president, the parliament actually votes for a president, then it's logical that if now we want to remove the president, parliament can also vote for the president to remove him. So I think that's the thing. So what you're seeing now is that it's playing into majoritarian politics in that sense that because the ANC has an overwhelming majority in parliament, then the other parties, they find it very difficult then to move motions and get motions passed, which is very interesting. So obviously, people are looking at this within the context of the 2019 election, whether this is going to hurt the ANC or not. And I think from the DA's perspective, because if you look at their core constituency, it's sort of like your middle class, upper middle class, and your more privileged classes in society. For them, obviously, they follow these things, and then they're seeing that actually, no, the DA is trying to, I suppose, remove President Zuma, which is what they think is the problem in the country. And then in that sense, then it's scoring them points. But for people who do not follow these things closely, which tends to be largely an ANC constituency, people in the rural areas and so on, I mean, obviously they don't follow some of the nitty-gritties of these things. So in terms of long-term game for 2019, yes, the DA will manage to bolster its core constituency amongst blacks who are in the middle and upper middle class constituencies, which is generally tends to be your Gauteng, your Cape Towns, your Durbans and your PEs and so on, which is what I think we saw in now the local government elections.
Levi?
Absolutely, I think Mel is right here. If you want to deal with this, you just have to have a majority in parliament. So yes, so as a strategy, it's working out, but I don't think it's doing nearly enough
But what's the
damage.
strategy here? Because they know that they're always going to be outvoted.
It's really to say, can you shine the spotlight on the ANC? In truth, the DA and the EFF would not really want President Zuma to
Do you
step
think
down
that's worked, though,
before now, because
these motions
it
of
wouldn't
no
be logical
confidence?
for them ahead of 2019, but it helps them currently, to bolster, that notion that the ANC is failing. So for as long as President Zuma is there, it's actually good political fodder for the opposition parties. But if it's really that sincere that we really want to fix the country and do right by our people, then the only way you have to do it under the current system is to have a majority in parliament, and that's not going to happen for a long time.
Yeah. I think for me, as to whether it's working or not, I mean, it's working in terms of like turning people away from the ANC, especially, as I say, your middle income and higher middle income people, because then from them they see it as sort of like an injustice what the people are doing, because then they wanted people to vote on their consciences as what the people were calling for. But this thing of voting for according to your conscience is very interesting also, because there was, if you remember, in the early 2000s, there was an abortion case where Parliament needed to pass abortion laws, and in that sense also the ANC also told the people that no, you can't vote according to your conscience, because people were saying that no, they're not for abortion. So the ANC then came down hard on them, and then the MPs, they passed the thing. So now abortion is legalized in the country. So it's that type of framework which also allows the ANC now to come now and say, no, you guys can't vote against President Zuma. You must vote according to the party line.
But, I mean, gentlemen, we know that I want to hear your thoughts on some ANC leaders who have publicly spoken out against Zuma's leadership, but seem to, chicken out when the time comes for the motion of no confidence. I think we saw one abstention in this one. In the previous one, I think there was 4. So it's really confusing. You can never really gauge what's going on, because the people that are speaking in public are not able to go and do it, when they're supposed to.
They actually didn't attend Parliament on the day this was moved forward. So I think your Praveen, Minister Godan was not, Mocheka was not in Parliament. So it's that kind of thing that you have, I think, up to about 32 ANC MPs who chose not to attend Parliament altogether. But still, even without that, you'd still have people who take instructions from Luthuli House. And this is just how it works, actually, that the party sends you to Parliament. So whatever the party says, you have to fulfill. You can't then decide against what the party has said in Parliament. If you do that, maybe, there will be consequences, definitely. But in terms of how the system works and how people are supposed to behave, the party that sponsors your seat in Parliament is the party that you take instructions from.
We saw 3 MPs crossing the floor in Lesotho just this week. That's where we're going to leave it on that topic. Another big story this week, of course, involving President Jacob Zuma, was the audio leak of his interview with former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela. The ANC has called for the new Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane to investigate her predecessor, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. Now, this is over claims that Madonsela released details of an interview with President Zuma and his lawyer while compiling the state of capture report. Gentlemen, what did you make of these developments? The fact that there's been, they filed a formal complaint to see if the former Public Protector can be investigated for the contravention of the Public Protectors Act?
Yeah, I think there's merit in what has been done here, because certainly it's a big deal that this has happened. The audio was leaked, so it remains for us to see if there has been any precedence that was set before, that this is a normal operating procedure for a public protector to do all these things. And I think today as well, there's another audio that was leaked, the evidence given by EFF leader Julius Malema as well. So I think some portions of what I've seen, some legal experts commenting, say the public protector can do this, but in Advocate Madonsela's case, we have to see if this happened whilst she was still in office, then maybe she would have some protection there. But if it happened after she had left office, then I think there is some cause for concern in how the conduct occurred there.
Well, she says that the audio tape was not leaked, but rather officially released. Melo?
I think for me it's very interesting because the argument that's coming up is that if you look in as part of the annexures of the state of capture report, she does put the transcripts there of like the conversations that she had with the people. So people are saying that, okay, fine, if she already released the transcripts, then what is the issue with the audio recordings? And I think if you look at this in terms of precedent, like the other issue, for example, if you remember with Oscar Pistorius, there's a thing that, I mean, court proceedings are public and the public can know and can read that stuff. But then there was an issue of should the court allow people to film the proceedings. And I think for me, there's a big difference between having transcripts and having actual audio, actual film that you can watch, because I think then it might deter people from wanting to come and give evidence in future because they fear being victimized. I mean, if I read something, then I do not necessarily attach it to you as Alicia, but if I see you, then I think there is some sort of stigma that can be arise from that type of thing. So I think those type of considerations which the courts have before looked at, I think would apply in this case. As to whether or not Thuli Madonsela is entitled to do that, I don't know. I suppose the lawyers would need to look at that.
But now, how legitimate is the call to investigate Madonsela? I mean, are you going with Levi's perception that if she was still in office, then we need to really look at what the implications are thereafter?
Yeah, but for me, like the question that you'd need to ask is what is the purpose of leaking the recordings, right? Because you've already got the transcript.
Yeah.
So why do you need to give the thing? So for me, part of, I suppose, my view on this whole state of capture thing is that it seems to be tending towards more of a political campaigning than anything else. Because as the former public protector has said, is that because the president was denying that he was being given a chance, she felt the need to clear her name. I mean, like for me, those things, it seems like it's personalizing the issue, right? It's about the office. If you've issued a report and you've said this is what happens, if somebody comes and denies and starts labeling, throwing accusations at you, why then do you need you feel the need to go on a political campaign to defend yourself? For me, that's the thing I find very puzzling about this thing.
No, what confuses me isn't what is contained in the documents, in the transcripts, the same thing as contained in the report and also on the audio then, Levi?
It will be. It will be the same thing. Most definitely. But here I think you're looking at one of the points that Melo raised, which is what does it do if you're going to present evidence or if you're going to speak to a public protector going forward in the perception it creates. So in this case, absolutely, there's a very significant public interest. And I think, people we're just waiting to hear and see, those who could not have read the report. So in that sense, it's really almost the same thing,
so
right?
What are we missing from this story? What still needs to happen?
I think for me, we're missing the nuance around the whole institution of the public protector, because even how this matter is being reported in the media is slightly worrying for me, in the sense that Advocate Madonsela is being divorced from the office of the public protector, in the sense that there's this concern about the incoming public protector as well. So we're beginning to think that, well, since we might not like Advocate, many people might not like Advocate Mkhwebane, then, it's necessary to create that separation. And it's happening in media. And I'm slightly concerned in that, it sort of erodes the good work that was done by Advocate Madonsela if we don't keep the spotlight on the public protector's office.
Very interesting.
It personalizes the issue. I think that's a problem.
And we were saying just previously that we need to be careful about making institutions centered around an individual. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that we analyze the domestic wage increases that will kickstart on the 1st of December, and also look at how rampant racism is in our country. Stay tuned for that.
Children's rights and health are a priority in the journey of good health.
All children should have access to adequate health care, not only curative but preventative as well.
How to identify ADHD on children.
ADHD is a childhood disorder which manifests with the symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and/or inattention.
Is breastfeeding still a vital nutrition to babies even today?
Breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life is absolutely crucial.
Catch Health Talk with Dr. Sello Mutawung every Saturday from 9 till 10 a.m.
This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. Domestic workers will receive an increment starting from the 1st of December. Now, this comes after the Labour Department made an announcement earlier this week. Domestic workers who work in Area A, which includes major metropolitan municipalities and cities, and work more than 27 hours per week will have an hourly rate of 12 Rand 42 cents from 11 Rand 44 cents, a weekly rate of 559.9 cents from 514 Rand 82 in 2015-2016, as well as a monthly rate of 2,422 Rand 54 cents, up from 2,230 Rand 70 cents. And those who work in Area B, that's including the rural areas, and who work for more than 27 hours per week, they'll have an hourly rate of 11 Rand 31 cents, a weekly rate of 508 Rand 93 cents, and a monthly rate of 2,205 Rand 17 cents. Now, this has raised concerns from some quarters, as the feeling is that both groups perform the very same job, but yet unequal remuneration. Let's take a quick look at this insert.
I think the most serious challenges that facing domestic workers right now is the fact that many domestic workers are still not registered for unemployment, with the result that when a domestic worker becomes unemployed, that she doesn't have entitled to any benefits. That is one of the serious problems. The next serious problem is that domestic workers still not covered by the minimum wage. Although we've got the best laws, like they say in South Africa, yes, we've got good laws, but if a domestic worker does not know the minimum wage, how would she be able to speak up for herself? So I think that is part, as number said, the biggest thing that's facing domestic workers now. And that is something that we've been fighting with the Department of Labour, is the compensation. There's actually no compensation for domestic workers, and by that I mean COIDA. If a domestic worker gets hurt at work, she cannot claim anything. With the result, if a domestic worker dies, the children are without the income. And that is the view that we face. Also, you are also facing verbal abuse from employers. Employers tend to tell the domestic workers, when they speak to them about the increment, they tell to them, go and ask your government, go and ask, as if it's not their government. So I think there is still a lot of challenges. Most of domestic workers work still 7 days a week. So how do we bring across that South Africa do have the best laws? How do we make it aware to the domestic workers? On our own, a union can't do it. We need those people that is there in power to come down, sit down with us and discuss how can we make the domestic worker aware of all these labor laws that's covering them.
Segment, we're now very pleased to be joined by Labour analyst Mamokete Molopiane, who's going to give us analysis on the domestic wage increment. Mamokete, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Look, why are they classing them into two different groups? I mean, it must be so confusing.
Not necessarily. You would recall that in the South African definition of workplace and the areas of work, urban areas are regarded as areas where people tend to get highly salarized because of the amount of time they spend commuting. So even when one look at COSATU's presentation on domestic workers, they often argue that Area A, or the urban areas, the metropolitans, people must get paid more by virtue not only of having to commute, but also by the sizes of the property that the domestic workers are working on. And of course, it's understandable within those who are domestic workers to say, but why are we being classified with different salaries and different pay scales? And it speaks to a broader, deeper issue of our policymakers within the Department of Labour, but also who feel the need to classify work in different categories, yet it is the same job.
Look, I mean, speaking of that, I'm going to ask the gentleman here. Wait, maybe let's start with the gentleman. What do you think about this, the classification into two different groups, yet they're doing the very same job? And that's the argument here. They're saying, why are we being classified as Group A and B, yet we're doing exactly the same duties? Melo?
I think for me, you cannot divorce this from the capitalist system in which the country operates. I mean, we've adopted a capitalist system, even though we call it a mixed system. And in a capitalist system, things work on supply and demand. So obviously in the urban areas, you'd find that there's more of a demand for that and people would be willing to pay a premium. And also in the urban areas, the average wealth per capita is much higher, therefore people can afford to pay that, as opposed to in the rural areas. For me, one of the big issues that comes out of this thing in terms of what the implications are is that if you look at somebody that's working in the rural areas, right, and then the work that they're doing, now you ask yourself, are they contributing something that's different to somebody that's in the urban areas?
Yeah.
And they're not, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing as you were saying during the break. I mean, even like the mining guys, I mean, they're also doing the same thing underground, but then they'd be paying less than somebody that's working on top of the ground where in the offices and so on. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
Levi, quickly.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it's just a policy issue, to say, within the system that we work. So it's quite legitimate that the domestic workers are raising this, but I think it also cuts across many sectors of the economy, and it really just boils down to the fact that we are working within a capitalist system.
Look, Mamokgetsi, you are the labor analyst here. Are you in any position to tell us exactly how their tasks differ? I mean, what is it exactly that sets them apart? And does this not then infringe on the rights of those on the lower earning bracket?
Look, there really is nothing that sets them apart or that is quite different. And as the previous guest, except the salary, as the previous guest had highlighted, that perhaps urban areas are more driven by supply and demand. And it's a challenge that I often pose to policymakers when we are debating laws about how wages must be structured, about sectoral determination of wages, be it in the domestic workers industry or in the private security industry or within any other industry for that matter, to say we cannot continue to have a classification of salaries per urban areas or per rural areas. And that is perhaps for me one of the things that must be tackled at NEDLEC, as we know that NEDLEC currently through discussions that are put together by the Deputy President, NEDLEC are looking at overhauling the Labour Relations Act and some of the aspects of it. So those are some of the key things that I feel must be at the focus point of NEDLEC. But more importantly, speak to a broader issue that we have somehow relegated domestic work and farm workers and security workers. They are classified as vulnerable sectors, and rightly so when you look at the amount of a salary that they get. Do remember that when we are saying somebody's salary has increased from 2,200 to 2,400 and they have to probably pay rent, they have to also probably pay for transportation and the time they spend commuting. So really what speaks down to, for me, should have perhaps been the department should have come up with a properly structured national minimum wage for domestic work.
Yeah, because you really can't choose where you work. I mean, it's one of those things. Are you saying that everybody that wants a better wage then must move and go look for work in the urban areas? Isn't it going to be congested with the job market competition? It's going to be crazy there. Mela?
I think that's a very important point that you're highlighting there, Alicia. And then it speaks also, if you look at the sort of the apartheid spatial planning, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the big issue is that you find that domestic workers live very far from their places of work.
True.
So in the urban areas, there's also that added factor now of transportation that you need to pay to get to wherever it is that you're working. And then that obviously, if you look at this 2,500 that they're being paid.
Okay, they don't pay heavy tax.
Yeah, they don't pay heavy tax, but from 2,500, you've got a family to support, and you've got all of these other things. So I think it also speaks to the issue of inequality in our country. But just to also look at the other side of the argument. The other side of the argument also is in terms of overall employment levels in the country, is that if we start having like a very high minimum wage, then we sort of like price people out of the market, because then people feel that I can afford to have a helper at my home. So then how is that going to work then?
Mamokgetsi, I mean, maybe just to wrap this up very quickly. I mean, we know that unions are normally at the forefront in wage increment discussions, but why is it that the domestic workers union, SAWU, is only putting up a fight now and saying that the money is not enough? Where have they been all along?
Actually, they have been there quite for a while, perhaps.
They haven't made enough noise.
Yes, perhaps, and also perhaps the media hasn't really covered them extensively because they are within COSATU, and COSATU has highlighted, as I had said, 3 areas where they classify workers as vulnerable sectors, and domestic workers are those. And again, it will speak to an issue of, do we need to have a national minimum wage, a whole as a South Africa, in terms of how different sectors are paid up? But it really, again, we must be able to answer this, that 20 years into democracy, we cannot have somebody working more than 27 hours and earning 2,500. And we are saying that is a wage that the person must, 1, put their child through universities, 2, must be able to sustain their lives, 3, must have transport to be able to go to that very work. So we need to look at how we structure wages in South Africa, because the inequality continues, the gap widens, and it's made so when you look at the wage that the domestic worker earns and the wage that a company executive earns. And that, for me, is the bigger issue in South Africa, to say, how do we bridge inequality and how do we not pay people what organized labor called slave wages while they are working very long and strenuous hours.
Mamokgethi, thank you so much for your analysis this morning. That was labor analyst Mamokgethi Malopiane, and she was giving us more insight on the domestic labor issues. Let's take a quick ad break, and after that, more news here on Media Monitor.
Girls crossing our borders often find themselves alone in the big city of Johannesburg.
I came here when my pregnancy was 6 months.
Like many other girls from Zimbabwe, Abigail found her way here to the Central Methodist Church.
My friend who was raped, who was forced to have sex at the church.
I insisted that this needed to be handled with the police.
I think we don't have rights. You do what you don't want to do and you'll be forced.
Any refugee in a strange country is vulnerable to forms of abuse and manipulation.
I don't have any option. I can just continue to put the guys so that I can take care of my baby.
Our final segment now. While the world is still coming to terms with Donald Trump winning the election race to the White House, Americans have met Tuesday's election outcome with outrage as they continue to protest against Trump taking up the presidency. Nevertheless, Barack Obama met with his successor to ensure a smooth transition of power when Trump takes up presidency at the White House soon in January. Here's more on this insert compiled by producer Lavela Jongilanga.
US President Barack Obama and President-elect Donald Trump held a meeting at the White House on Thursday in their first public attempt towards a peaceful transition of power after the property mogul's surprise election victory. At a press conference held shortly after the meeting, Obama mentioned that the conversation shared with Trump was about foreign and domestic policy, as well as the upcoming transition of power. He has also called upon the American people to unite despite different preferences.
My number one priority in the coming 2 months is to try to facilitate a transition that ensures our president-elect is successful. I have been very encouraged by the, I think, interest in President-elect Trump's wanting to work with my team around many of the issues that this great country faces. And I believe that it is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together, work together to deal with the many challenges that we face.
Admitting that the two men had not had a one-on-one encounter before, Trump mentioned how he looks forward to more meetings with Obama and said several matters were discussed.
We discussed a lot of different situations, some wonderful and some difficulties. I very much look forward to dealing with the president in the future, including counsel. He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved. So, Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you.
Anti-Trump protests continue in various states in America. The protests have turned violent in some parts where demonstrators have clashed with the police.
Do you think Trump was underestimated as a possible candidate for the presidency? Let's start with you, Levi.
Yes, he was, very much so. If you look at how mainstream media were covering Trump, what the mainstream discourse was, it was all pointing towards Hillary Clinton victory. Even the posters had it wrong. But it's understandable that people could get it so wrong because not much attention was paid to Trump's campaign and to whom he was really speaking to. Their overall strategy, because again of the U.S. electoral system, so they had a very nuanced and focused strategy to just claim the electoral votes that they needed. So he wasn't going for a popular vote, but he just needed to know that once he claimed the states that he needed to win in, then that would be enough. And I think he did that very well.
Well, he certainly didn't win the popular vote, but I mean, what does the outcome now say about America at large, Bello?
I think this throws the whole America democracy project into some sort of crisis. Because, I mean, they've come across now as being sort of like the moral police of the world. So you can't come out now and sort of like have higher moral ground when your president is sort of like been campaigning on a racist platform. I think that problematizes your entire standing. For me, the other thing also looking at the insert now with Barack Obama, I think actually he looks a bit dazed because, I mean, if you heard him when he was campaigning, he kept on hammering that he does not believe that as a person, Trump is fit to be president. So now you campaign that a day before and the next day now the guy is the president-elect. Now you have to sort of swallow your words. So I think it also speaks to some extent to Barack Obama's character and his class that he's able to do that. So for me, the other thing also with the US election, I think obviously people underestimated it to the extent that like even you find that the conservative, the Republican, the Democrat media houses didn't even see Trump because of the way he was campaigning. They thought, no, this guy's an absolute joke and so on. But in the US, if you look at the white constituency that sort of like brought Trump into power, I think that constituency has been overlooked. People have been more focusing on sort of your Latino vote, your black vote and so on, thinking that those other voters don't really make much of a difference. And in this election, they did make much of a difference. And if you compare to when Obama won his previous two elections, actually the voter turnout in these elections was very much lower. So where Obama managed to mobilize the younger millennials to come vote for him, Hillary failed to be able to do that. So you find that when Obama won his first election, he won like with something like 70 million votes. And if you compare now with Hillary and then her and Trump, the votes around about 60 million. So that's 10 million less people that actually voted, which then brought this racial dynamic into play.
It's a very interesting outcome indeed. I mean, a lot of people were just, I think they disliked him because of his foreign policy. But I mean, of course, we know the sex scandals and how he feels about women or perceived to feel about women. What did you make about the fact that Cuba announced a military drill shortly after Trump was announced as president?
That's just good politics, I think, for Cuba and actually sending a message to
But now what happens to those relations? You know, that's what I really, really want to know. What's going to happen to those? I mean, they've taken such further strides in terms of, bringing the two nations together after 51 years of hostilities.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are thinking that Trump is bad, is going to be bad for foreign policy. I actually think, the opposite is true. This is somebody who, in my view, is going to spend a lot more time focusing on domestic issues than he would. He has to repair a divided country to begin with. He has to fulfill some of his campaign promises, and he has already declared that the U.S. should not be involved in a lot of wars. He's going for peace. He wants to negotiate with a lot of people. So he might spring a foreign policy surprise than the fear that we had, with do you want Trump with the nuclear codes and everything. I actually think it's a relief to many people outside the U.S. A Trump presidency is a relief in terms of foreign policy, because then then you're just thinking that the less attention that you have, the better.
Gentlemen, that's where we have to leave it, unfortunately. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Levi Kwabato, Mr. Melo Maholeho, joining us for a sound analysis of some of the biggest news of this week. Thank you so much for joining us here on Media Monitor. We will be back same time and place next week at 9 a.m. That is right here on the SABC News channel. From me and the rest of the team, have a good day, but stay tuned because I'm back on top of the hour with A News.